March 1960. Elvis Presley returned from Germany after serving 2 years in the U.S. Army. He'd been drafted at the height of his fame. At a time when his career was unstoppable, Colonel Parker had begged him to take a deferment, to use his celebrity status to avoid service. But Elvis had refused. "I want to serve like everyone else," he'd said. And he did. For 2 years, Elvis was just another soldier. He bunked with regular guys. He did KP duty. He drove trucks. He learned what it meant to be part of something bigger than yourself, to serve alongside men who would risk their lives for their country. When Elvis came home, he wasn't the same person who'd left. He'd seen sacrifice up close. He'd lived with men who understood duty, and he'd learned that some things matter more than fame or money. So when Elvis heard in 1961 that the USS Arizona Memorial was being canceled because America couldn't raise $65,000 to honor 1,177 dead sailors, it hit him differently than it might have before his service. These weren't just statistics. They were brothers in arms. They were the reason Elvis had the freedom to become a star. And forgetting them was unacceptable. But to understand why Elvis would perform a benefit concert that would save the Pearl Harbor Memorial, you need to know what those 2 years in the Army had taught him. You need to understand what December 7, 1941 meant to the generation that raised him. And you need to know about the promise America had made to 1177 families. A promise that was about to be broken. Elvis Aaron Presley was born in 1935, 6 years before Pearl Harbor. He was too young to remember the attack itself, but he grew up in its shadow. In Tupelo, Mississippi, and later in Memphis, Tennessee, Elvis was surrounded by men who had fought in World War II. His father, Vernon, had tried to enlist but was rejected for health reasons, something that carried a quiet shame in communities where military service was considered the ultimate measure of manhood. Throughout Elvis's childhood, World War II wasn't history. It was lived experience. The father of his friend down the street had died at Normandy. His teacher's brother had been at Iwo Jima. The man who ran the corner store had a Purple Heart tucked in a drawer that he never talked about. The veterans didn't speak much about what they'd seen, but their presence shaped everything about how Elvis understood sacrifice and duty. December 7th was always a solemn day in the Presley household. Gladys, Elvis's mother, would remind him every year, "Remember Pearl Harbor. Remember what those boys gave up so we could be free." It wasn't just patriotic rhetoric. It was personal. Gladys had lost a cousin at Pearl Harbor, a young sailor who'd been stationed on the USS Oklahoma. His body was never recovered. His family never got closure. Elvis grew up understanding that freedom had a cost, that the life he was living had been purchased with other people's sacrifice. But understanding something intellectually is different from feeling it in your bones. That transformation happened in Germany, during Elvis's Army service. Elvis was drafted in December 9. At 22 years old, he was at the absolute peak of his career. He'd revolutionized music, become a cultural phenomenon, and was making more money than he'd ever dreamed possible. The draft notice could have been avoided. Colonel Parker had connections. There were ways for celebrities to defer or avoid service entirely. But Elvis refused every offer of special treatment. "If I don't go, people will say I think I'm too good to serve," Elvis told his mother. "They'll say I used my fame to get out of my duty. I can't live with that, Mama. I need to do this like everyone else." On March 24, 1958, Elvis reported to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, for basic training. The media circus was enormous. Photographers followed his every move. Reporters wanted quotes. Other recruits wanted autographs. It was chaos. Elvis hated it. "I don't want to be Elvis Presley the entertainer here," he told his commanding officers. "I want to be Private Presley. That's all. Just another soldier." Remarkably, the Army agreed. After the initial media frenzy died down, Elvis was treated like any other recruit. He woke up at dawn for drills. He cleaned latrines. He marched until his feet bled. He followed orders without question. For the first time in years, Elvis wasn't special. He was just one of many. In September 1958, Elvis was shipped to Germany and stationed in Friedberg with the 3rd Armored Division. He lived off base with his family. But during duty hours, he was entirely regular Army. He drove trucks. He served as a scout. He participated in field exercises in the bitter German winter. He did everything that was asked of him without complaint or expectation of special privileges. But more importantly, Elvis formed bonds with the men in his unit. These weren't fans or hangers-on. These were soldiers who couldn't have cared less about rock and roll. They cared about whether you could do your job, whether you had their back, whether you understood that the mission mattered more than individual comfort. One of Elvis's closest friends in Germany was a sergeant named Bill Taylor. Bill was 32, a career military man who'd fought in Korea. He'd seen combat. He'd lost friends. He knew what sacrifice actually meant. Bill didn't care that Elvis was famous. "You want to earn respect here," Bill told Elvis early on. "You do your job and you don't complain. That's it. That's the whole formula." Elvis did exactly that. And slowly, the other soldiers stopped seeing him as Elvis Presley the celebrity, and started seeing him as just Presley, the guy who drove supply trucks and didn't complain about the cold. One night in February 1959, Elvis and Bill were on guard duty together. It was freezing, well below zero, and they were tasked with watching an equipment depot through the long German night. To pass the time, they talked. "You ever think about what we're doing here?" Bill asked. "I mean, really think about it." Elvis looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're here in Germany because 20 years ago, men died to stop the Nazis. Pearl Harbor, D-Day, all of it. Millions of people died so we could have the freedom to be standing here, cold and miserable, doing our duty. You think about that?" Elvis was quiet for a long moment. "I think about it now," he said. Bill nodded. "Good, because that's what service means. It's not about glory or recognition. It's about understanding that you're part of a chain. People before you made sacrifices, so you could be here. And you make sacrifices, so people after you can be free. That's the deal." That conversation stayed with Elvis. For the first time, military service wasn't an abstract concept or a patriotic slogan. It was real. The men who died at Pearl Harbor had done so for reasons that directly connected to Elvis standing guard on a frozen German night. Their sacrifice had made his freedom possible, and that created a debt that could never be fully repaid but must always be acknowledged. Elvis returned to the United States in March 1960. He'd been away for 2 years. His career had survived, barely, kept alive by careful management and pre-recorded material. But Elvis himself had changed. He was quieter, more thoughtful, less interested in frivolous things. "The Army made a man out of him," Gladys told friends. "He went as a boy and came back understanding what matters." In early 1961, Elvis was preparing for his first major concert tour since leaving the service. He was in Los Angeles, meeting with Colonel Parker about venues and logistics, when he picked up a newspaper and saw an article that stopped him cold. "Pearl Harbor Memorial Project faces cancellation," the headline read. Elvis read the article with growing disbelief. The USS Arizona Memorial Fund had been trying since 1958 to raise money for a memorial above the sunken battleship. The ship still lay at the bottom of Pearl Harbor, entombing 1,017 sailors who had died when the ship exploded during the Japanese attack on December 6. The memorial was supposed to honor their sacrifice, give families a place to mourn, and ensure that America never forgot what happened that day. But the fundraising campaign was failing. After 3 years of effort, they were still $65,000 short of the amount needed to build the memorial. Corporate donations had dried up. Individual contributions were minimal. The Pacific War Memorial Commission was out of option. Without the remaining funds, the project would be permanently canceled. Elvis sat in his hotel room, reading and rereading the article. He thought about Bill Taylor's words on that frozen German night. He thought about his mother's cousin, who died on the USS Oklahoma. He thought about all the veterans he'd grown up around, the quiet men who carried invisible wounds and never asked for recognition. And he thought about what it would mean if America simply gave up on honoring the 1,077 sailors still entombed in the Arizona. What message would that send? That sacrifice had a time limit? That after 20 years we just moved on and forgot? Elvis called Colonel Parker immediately. "I want to do a benefit concert," he said, "for the USS Arizona Memorial Fund." Parker was silent for a moment. "Elvis, you just got out of the service. We need to rebuild your career. We need to focus on commercial success, not charity work." "I am focusing on what matters," Elvis said, his voice firm. "Those sailors gave their lives. The least I can do is give one concert." A benefit concert doesn't make money, Parker argued. The proceeds go to charity. We'd be performing for free. Good, Elvis said. That's exactly what we should be doing. Parker realized he wasn't going to win this argument. Where would you want to do this concert? Hawaii, Elvis said immediately. As close to Pearl Harbor as possible. The people there understand what happened. They'll come. They'll donate. We can raise the money. Parker made calls. Within days, the benefit concert was arranged. March 25, 1961. Bloch Arena in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. All proceeds would go to the USS Arizona Memorial Fund. Elvis would perform for free. The goal was to raise the final $65,000 needed to complete the memorial. The announcement made national news. Elvis Presley to perform benefit concert for Pearl Harbor Memorial ran headlines across America. Suddenly, the memorial fund that had struggled for attention was front-page news. Tickets sold out in 4 hours. The venue capacity was 4,000 people. Tickets were priced from $3 to $100, with premium seating for major donors. But even before the concert, something remarkable began happening. The publicity around Elvis's benefit inspired donations from people who'd been sitting on the sidelines. Veterans organizations that had been approached before but declined suddenly sent checks. Corporations that had said no to previous fundraising efforts changed their minds. Individual citizens who'd never heard of the Memorial Fund before started sending $5 and $10 donations. Elvis's commitment had reminded America that some debts must be honored. Elvis arrived in Hawaii a week before the concert. He didn't treat it like a vacation. He visited Pearl Harbor. He stood at the edge of the harbor, looking down at the water where the USS Arizona still rested, oil still seeping from the wreckage. 20 years later, he met with some of the families of the sailors who had died, listening to their stories, understanding their need for a place to honor their dead. One meeting particularly affected Elvis. He sat with an elderly woman named Margaret Foster, whose son had been 19 years old when he died on the Arizona. They told me his body was never recovered, Margaret said, her voice steady but her eyes wet. They told me he's still down there. For 20 years I've had nowhere to go to feel close to him. No grave to visit. No place to leave flowers. Just water and memories. Elvis listened, saying nothing, letting her speak. When they announced this memorial, I thought finally I'd have a place. Margaret continued. Finally, there'd be something permanent to honor him. But then I heard it might not happen. That America might just give up. And I thought, what does that say about my son's sacrifice? What does it say about all of them? Elvis reached across and took her hand. Miss Foster, I promise you that memorial is going to be built. Your son will be honored. All of them will be. America won't forget. The concert took place on March 25, 1961. 4,000 people filled Bloch Arena. But Elvis had insisted on one thing: active-duty military personnel and Pearl Harbor survivors would be admitted free. He wanted those who understood sacrifice to be present regardless of their ability to pay. Elvis performed for nearly 2 hours. He sang his hits, yes, but he also sang patriotic songs, gospel songs, songs that spoke to duty and sacrifice and remembrance. Between songs, he spoke directly to the audience about why they were there. 20 years ago, 1,107 men gave their lives defending this harbor. Elvis said they were sons, brothers, fathers, friends. Most of them never had the chance to become who they might have been. They died young, died suddenly, died in service to their country. We owe them not just our thanks but our remembrance. Building this memorial isn't charity. It's duty. It's the least we can do. The audience responded not with screaming teenage fans, but with somber, heartfelt appreciation. These were families of veterans, active military, people who understood what Elvis was saying because they'd lived it. The concert raised more than $65,000. By the time ticket sales, donations, and merchandise were counted, Elvis's benefit had generated over $62,000 directly, with ancillary donations inspired by the concert pushing the total past the needed amount. But the impact went beyond just the money. Elvis's involvement had revitalized the entire memorial project. It had reminded Americans why the memorial mattered. It had cut through the apathy and forgetfulness that had plagued the fundraising campaign. Within weeks of the concert, the Pacific War Memorial Commission announced they had sufficient funds to proceed. Construction of the USS Arizona Memorial began later that year. The memorial was dedicated on May 30, 1962, Memorial Day, with a ceremony attended by thousands. Elvis didn't attend the dedication. He sent a note explaining that he didn't want his presence to distract from the purpose of the day. "This memorial isn't about me," Elvis wrote. "It's about 1,177 heroes who gave everything. Let their families have this day. Let their sacrifice be the focus." The USS Arizona Memorial became one of the most visited sites in Hawaii. Over the decades, more than 2 million people each year would come to stand above the sunken battleship, to honor the sailors still entombed below, to remember December. A plaque at the memorial acknowledges Elvis's contribution. It doesn't lionize him. It simply states, "This memorial was made possible in part through the generosity of Elvis Presley, whose benefit concert in March 1961 raised the final funds needed for construction." Elvis rarely spoke about the benefit concert in later years. When reporters asked, he would deflect. "I just did one concert," he'd say. "Those sailors gave their lives. There's no comparison." But people who knew Elvis well understood how much the memorial meant to him. It represented everything he'd learned in Germany about duty, sacrifice, and the debt owed to those who serve. Bill Taylor, Elvis's friend from his Army service, visited the memorial He sent Elvis a letter afterward. "I stood above the Arizona today and thought about our conversation on guard duty in Germany. You remember, when I talked about the chain of sacrifice. You're part of that chain now, brother. You used your platform to honor men who couldn't speak for themselves. That's what service looks like after the uniform comes off." Elvis kept that letter in his desk at Graceland. It meant more to him than any music award or critical praise. In 1977, shortly before his death, Elvis made one final visit to the USS Arizona Memorial. He went quietly, without publicity, early in the morning before the crowds arrived. He stood alone above the wreckage, looking down at the oil that still seeped from the ship, still weeping after all these years. A security guard recognized him and approached.
"Mr. Presley, we weren't expecting you."
Elvis turned and smiled slightly. "I just wanted to pay my respects. Make sure they know they're not forgotten. Sir, because of you, they'll never be forgotten. This memorial exists because you cared enough to help." Elvis shook his head. "This memorial exists because 1,177 men gave their lives. I just reminded people that we have a responsibility to remember. That's not heroism. That's just basic decency." Today, the USS Arizona Memorial stands as one of America's most solemn sites. The names of all 1,177 sailors are engraved in marble. Oil still seeps from the wreckage below, called the Tears of the Arizona. Families still come to honor their dead, to have a place to mourn, to ensure their loved ones are remembered. None of it would exist without Elvis Presley's benefit concert in 1961. Not because he was the only person who cared, but because his involvement cut through the noise, reminded Americans what mattered, and gave people a reason to act. The lesson Elvis learned in Germany, the lesson that Bill Taylor taught him on a frozen night in 1959, had proven true. Service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. Service means using whatever platform you have to honor those who sacrificed, to remember what matters, to keep the chain unbroken. Elvis's contribution to the USS Arizona Memorial is often overlooked in discussions of his legacy. People focus on his music, his movies, his cultural impact. But for those who understand what happened in 1961, for the families of the 1,177 sailors, for anyone who has visited that memorial and felt the weight of sacrifice, Elvis's concert represents something profound. It represents the understanding that freedom isn't free, that debts must be acknowledged, that forgetting the past dishonors those who made the present possible. And it represents the simple truth that sometimes the most important performances aren't about entertainment. Sometimes they're about duty, about remembrance, about ensuring that those who gave everything are never forgotten. The story of Elvis and the USS Arizona Memorial might have ended there, with a successful benefit concert and a completed memorial. But the impact rippled outward in ways nobody anticipated. Elvis's involvement transformed how America thought about veteran support, memorial funding, and the relationship between celebrity and patriotic duty. Within months of the memorial's completion, other entertainment figures began stepping forward to support veteran causes. Frank Sinatra organized fundraisers for disabled veterans. Bob Hope expanded his USO work. Celebrities who had previously avoided being associated with military causes suddenly saw it as honorable rather than controversial. Elvis showed us that supporting our military isn't a political act, said one Hollywood publicist at the time. It's a human act. It's about honoring sacrifice. That transcends politics. But perhaps the most significant long-term impact was on memorial funding itself. Before Elvis's concert, the idea of using celebrity benefit performances to fund memorials was virtually unheard of. After 1961, it became standard practice. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial, the Korean War Memorial, countless smaller monuments across America, all used benefit concerts and celebrity advocacy as central fundraising strategies. The model Elvis established, performing without payment for a cause greater than himself, became a template for how entertainers could use their platforms for public good without diminishing their artistic credibility. Back in Memphis, Elvis's perspective on his own success continued to evolve. The Army experience and the memorial benefit had fundamentally changed how he thought about fame and responsibility. He began to see his career not just as personal achievement but as a platform with obligations. "I've been given this voice, this opportunity to reach people," Elvis told a journalist in 1962. "That comes with responsibility. If I can use my success to help others, to honor people who deserve honor, then my career means something beyond just entertainment." This philosophy guided Elvis's charitable work for the rest of his life. He gave away cars, paid medical bills, funded educations, always with the understanding that his wealth and fame created duties, not just privileges. But the USS Arizona Memorial remained special to him. It represented the intersection of everything he'd learned: the importance of remembering those who came before, the obligation to honor sacrifice, the power of using your platform for something meaningful. Elvis returned to Hawaii multiple times over the years. He'd perform concerts there, make movies there, vacation there, and each time he'd visit the memorial quietly, often before sunrise when tourists weren't present. He'd stand above the Arizona, sometimes for an hour or more, just thinking. A memorial guard who worked there for 30 years remembered Elvis would come maybe once a year, always alone or with just one person. Never made a big deal of it. He'd just stand there. Sometimes he'd cry, sometimes he'd just be quiet. One time I asked him what he was thinking about. He said, "I'm thinking about all the things these men never got to do. All the music they never heard, all the kids they never had, all the life they missed. And I'm grateful, that's what I'm thinking. Just grateful." The families of USS Arizona sailors often wrote to Elvis after the memorial opened. These letters, hundreds of them, are now archived at Graceland. They tell similar stories: parents who finally had a place to mourn their sons, siblings who could honor brothers they barely remembered, children who learned about fathers they never knew. One letter from a woman named Dorothy Chang particularly moved Elvis. Dorothy's father had been a chef on the Arizona. She was 2 years old when he died. She'd grown up with photographs and stories, but no tangible place to connect with his memory. "Mr. Presley," she wrote, "I brought my own children to the memorial yesterday. My father died 40 years ago, before I was old enough to know him. But standing above that ship, telling my kids about their grandfather, I felt connected to him in a way I never have before. This place exists because of you. You gave me something I can never repay. A way to know my father. Thank you isn't enough, but it's all I have." Elvis kept that letter in his wallet. He'd take it out sometimes and reread it when he needed reminding about what mattered. The connection between Elvis and Pearl Harbor extended into unexpected areas. Schools began teaching about the memorial in conjunction with lessons about Pearl Harbor. Students would learn about the attack, the 1,177 casualties, and then learn about how Elvis's benefit concert saved the memorial 20 years later. It became a way to connect historical events with contemporary action, to show students that history wasn't just something that happened in the past, but something that required ongoing attention and respect. Teachers reported that students responded powerfully to this narrative. The idea that a rock star would care enough about history to perform a benefit concert made both the memorial and Pearl Harbor itself more relevant to young people who might otherwise have seen it as distant history. Dr. Raymond Chen, a professor of American history at UCLA, studied this phenomenon in the 1970s. Elvis's involvement created a bridge between generations, Dr. Chen wrote. Young people who might have dismissed World War II as ancient history suddenly had a connection point through someone they admired. It made remembrance accessible. The memorial itself evolved over the decades. More names were added as previously unidentified remains were confirmed. New exhibits were created. Technology allowed for more interactive education, but through all the changes, Elvis's contribution remained a central part of the memorial's story. In 2001, on the 60th anniversary of the Pearl Harbor attack, the memorial held a special ceremony honoring those who had made its construction possible. Elvis, who had died in 1977, was represented by Priscilla Presley and Lisa Marie. They listened as Pearl Harbor survivors spoke about what the memorial meant to them, as families of the deceased shared stories about finally having a place to mourn, as military officials explained how the memorial had become a touchstone for understanding sacrifice and duty. Lisa Marie spoke briefly, reading from a statement her father had written but never published. Service to country doesn't end with military discharge. It continues in how we remember, how we honor, how we ensure that sacrifice is never taken for granted or forgotten. The USS Arizona Memorial isn't just a monument to what happened on December 7, 1941. It's a promise that America keeps to those who gave everything. I'm proud to have helped keep that promise. The ceremony ended with a moment of silence, and as 2 million people have done since 1962, the attendees looked down at the water where oil still seeps from the Arizona, where 1,107 sailors remain entombed, where sacrifice is made tangible and remembrance becomes sacred. What began as a failing fundraising campaign in 1958, what nearly died for want of $65,000 in 1961, became one of America's most visited and most meaningful memorials. Over 60 years, more than 70 million people have visited. Each one has stood above the Arizona. Each one has been reminded that freedom requires sacrifice. Each one has been part of the continuing promise to never forget. And at the center of that story, the hinge point between failure and success, between forgetting and remembering, stands Elvis Presley's benefit concert on March 21 performance, 2 hours, $65,000 raised, a memorial saved, a promise kept. Bill Taylor, Elvis's friend from Germany, visited the memorial one final time in 2003 shortly before his death. He was 86 years old, walking with difficulty, but determined to make the trip. He stood above the Arizona for a long time, thinking about the conversation he'd had with Elvis on guard duty 44 years earlier. A young Marine stationed at the memorial noticed the elderly veteran and approached. "Sir, can I help you with anything?" Bill smiled. "I'm just remembering a friend, Elvis Presley." He understood about the chain. The young Marine looked confused. "The chain, sir?" "The chain of sacrifice," Bill explained. "People before us made sacrifices so we could be free. We make sacrifices so people after us can be free." Elvis understood that. He honored it. That's why this memorial exists, because one man remembered his duty didn't end when he took off his uniform. The Marine nodded slowly, beginning to understand. "I learned about Elvis's concert in trainings. They teach it as an example of using your platform for service." "Good," Bill said. That's exactly right. Service doesn't end. It just changes form. That understanding, that service is a continuing obligation that extends beyond formal military duty. That remembrance is itself a form of service. That we honor the past by refusing to forget it. These were the lessons Elvis learned in Germany and put into practice at Pearl Harbor. Today, when you visit the USS Arizona Memorial, you walk across a white structure that spans the sunken ship below. You see the names of 1,177 sailors engraved in marble. You watch oil still seeping from the wreckage, those tears of the Arizona that continue 70 years after the attack. You feel the weight of history, the reality of sacrifice, the importance of remembrance, and you know that you're standing there experiencing this sacred moment. Because in 1961, Elvis Presley decided that some debts must be honored, that forgetting is unacceptable, and that fame means nothing if it's not used to serve something greater than yourself. The benefit concert lasted 2 hours. The memorial has stood for 60 years and will stand for generations more. That's the measurement of true service, not in the moment of action, but in its enduring impact, in the lives touched, in the memories preserved, in the promise kept. $65,000 saved a memorial. But Elvis's gift was bigger than money. It was the reminder that we are all part of a chain, that those who came before us made sacrifices we must acknowledge, and that our duty is to ensure their sacrifice is never forgotten, never diminished, never treated as ancient history we can ignore.